If the only reason you clicked on this video was to see this deep, dark secret of professional photographers, then lucky for you, you only have to watch the first 10 seconds. P, it stands for professional mode. That's all you need. What's up? My name is Jay LeBlanc, wedding photographer and photography educator. Okay, the thumbnail and title may have been a little bit of clickbait, but how else am I going to get you to watch this video? People love asking, what are your settings? Especially when you're a new photographer and you just don't know how a photographer came about a certain style or look to their picture. They ask the photographer, what are your settings? When there's so many other factors involved in it, but what are your settings are a good starting ground because that's something that you can very easily replicate. You may not have the location, lighting, or models, but you can very easily turn your camera to those exact same settings, hoping that you make a similar image. Am I right? Today, I'm gonna walk you through the general settings that I use at most weddings. I'm gonna break up the wedding day into multiple parts and give you my starting point for the settings that I would use for each scenario. Now, just a general disclaimer, this is just advice. I don't even do this at every single wedding. This is just kind of my go-to starting point. I use this at maybe a little bit more than 50% of my weddings. So this is, I guess, the majority, but this is just a starting point. This isn't even my must shoot for me. So take this with a grain of salt, and maybe when you use this in your photography, use it as a starting point. Then change what you need to adapt to the scene and the lighting to create a good picture for the environment that you're shooting in. And stick around to the very end when I'm gonna give you a bonus tip and give you the settings for how I shoot my nighttime pictures. Something that my clients absolutely love, but can sometimes be a little bit tricky. Now for most of the wedding day, I'm gonna stick to two modes, AV, which stands for aperture value, and manual. If you have a camera other than Canon, aperture value might be called something else. So read your manual. You know, the little booklet of paper that you got when you first bought it and you just threw that away? Don't worry, you can download it online. For those of you who don't know what aperture value means, real quick, it means I'm gonna pick the f-stop and the ISO, and the camera's gonna choose the shutter speed. You can set certain parameters so that the shutter speed doesn't go too low or too high. Personally, when I'm using aperture value, I don't use electronic shutter. I've been using aperture value for so long, I have a tendency to just listen to the shutter when it goes off and make sure it's not going too slow. If I do hear that the shutter is going too slow, I'm gonna just double check and make sure that there's no motion blur from my hand shaking or too much camera movement. But for the most part, I have a pretty good ear of listening to what the shutter speed sounds like, so I know if the camera's dropping the shutter too low for what I feel comfortable hand holding. My fly's open. Good thing you can't see that. That would have been for a different channel. To start off the wedding day, I always start with the bridal prep. So I'm usually either in a hotel room or the home of the bride or maybe the bride's mother doing all these pictures. Meaning I usually am dealing with mixed light, tight spaces, and less than ideal shooting conditions. Every once in a while, I'm blessed with a beautiful bridal suite, but that's like once a year. So don't expect to always get beautiful, perfect lighting in a gorgeous, wide open room with lots of room to work and your ideal shooting situation, because more often than not, that's not gonna happen. During bridal prep, for the most part, I'm in aperture value. My ISO is usually between 800 and 1600. My shutter speed, well, that's up to the camera. And my aperture is set between f2 and f4. The reason why I'm choosing AV for the bridal prep is because most of the time I'm working with window light. Because in these rooms and hotels that I'm often doing the bridal prep in, the lighting sucks. So I'm gonna use the window light as much as I can. And with using window light, just remember, the further you get away from the window, the darker it's gonna be. So if I shoot somebody who's standing right next to the window getting their makeup done, and then real quick over my shoulder, two girls are joking or sharing a cute moment, and I just want to spin around and take a picture of them across the room, well, the lighting is going to be drastically different. So instead of me having to turn, adjust my settings, and then get a shot and potentially miss a moment, I just let the camera choose the shutter speed. And that way I have a higher chance of getting those emotions in that moment that happens between those girls on the wedding day. My ISO is usually between 800 and 1600. The main reason I'm at this high of an ISO is mostly because usually these rooms that girls are getting ready in don't have the best lighting, and I just want to be able to make sure that my shutter speed is going to stay high enough that nothing's going to be blurry or out of focus. The shutter speed, like I said, is going to be the camera's choice because I'm shooting in aperture value mode. And as far as aperture, I'm usually shooting somewhere between f2 and f4. I tend to shoot a little bit more wide open if I'm only shooting one person and I'm trying to blur out the background, because usually the room that the girls are getting ready in is just full of a lot of stuff. Everybody brings their personal belongings, hair and makeup has their stuff, there's food in the background, there's drinks, maybe they were partying in that room from the night before and there's a lot of garbage in the corner. So I usually have a tendency to shoot pretty wide open to just try and eliminate that stuff from being too much of a distraction in the background of the pictures. And then when needed, I'll stop my camera down to shoot at a little bit larger of an aperture so I can get more people in focus. If I'm doing a group shot or if I want to be able to get an interaction between a couple people, I'll adjust my aperture accordingly. The next part of the day would be the first look with the bride and groom, or any time that I'm shooting only 2 people. This could be the bride with her mom or one of her girls. This could be the groom with his dad or one of the guys. Pretty much anytime I'm shooting 2 people and we're outdoors, I'm gonna still be in aperture value mode. My aperture is gonna be around 200-ish. I usually try to find a good shady spot for taking pictures as the lighting's a little bit more flattering, so there's not as much light. So I'll shoot around 200. People say, oh, you gotta shoot at ISO 100, that's where the picture looks the best. You know what, when it comes to weddings, bride and groom don't give a shit as long as the picture looks good. Keep that in mind next time you get too caught up in what the settings are of somebody's picture. Unless you're shooting for a competition, I'll tell you what, that bride and groom who is writing you a check and paying your bills, they really don't care what ISO you shoot at as long as the picture looks good. I've been shooting Canon cameras since the first 5D, and I've pushed the ISO on these cameras way higher than most photographers would feel comfortable with. And I have never once had a couple come back to me and say, these pictures look a little grainy. Keep that in mind. Shutter speed for these pictures, again, camera's choice because I'm shooting AV. And for the aperture, it depends on the creative effect that I'm going for. I could be shooting anywhere from 1.4 all the way up to 5.6. 1.4 if I'm really just trying to focus in on maybe just the bride's eye that's closest to the camera and just let everything go all blurry and creamy and beautiful out of focus in the background. That bokeh-licious. RIP Digital Rev. That was a good YouTube channel. Or sometimes I'll shoot as high as 5.6 if I'm trying to do a big, wide environmental portrait. Something that I absolutely love when the couple has a wedding at a venue that has beautiful grounds. Now for portraits, anytime that there's more than 2 people, this goes for any family pictures, bridal party pictures, you can count to 2, right? Anytime there's more than 2, that's 3 or more. This is what I'm referring to. I'm gonna be in manual mode. The reason why I'm in manual mode is often when I'm shooting more than 2 people on a wedding day, I want my pictures to look consistent. So I'm gonna be in manual mode so that everything about every one of those pictures look the exact same. Because when it comes time to put together an album and we have all the family pictures next to each other or all the bridal party pictures next to each other, we want it to be very cohesive. Sure, we can make adjustments later on in Lightroom, but let's make our lives easy as possible in camera. So for my settings, I'm gonna shoot at ISO 200-ish. Again, I don't know why, I just like shooting at ISO 200. Set your shutter speed to whatever it needs to be so that your pictures look good. I don't know what your lighting conditions are gonna be. I don't know if you're gonna be shooting in bright sunlight, backlighting your subject, or if you're shooting in open shade, or maybe it's a super cloudy, overcast, gloomy day, and you have to even bump up your ISO in order to have a shutter speed that you can hand hold. So here with the shutter speed, you're just gonna have to experiment for what works for you. And as far as aperture, I'm shooting usually around 5.6, give or take a stop. I'm usually shooting pretty wide angle when I'm dealing with large groups or multiple people. So you don't have to worry too much about shooting at a crazy high f-stop to get everything in focus, but I just wanna make sure that everybody is in focus. So I find that 5.6, give or take a stop, is pretty much my sweet spot. Quick note, if you're really enjoying listening to me talk about the settings of my camera on my wedding days, drop a like below. Do me a favor, it just helps me out. It costs you nothing, it takes you maybe a half of a second to do. I'll give you a high five through the camera. Thanks. Boom. On to the next one. The next part of the wedding day, we have the ceremony. Now, we can have a ceremony indoors, such as in a church or inside the venue, or we can have a ceremony outdoors. And lucky for you, I'm gonna give you the settings for both. If we have an indoor ceremony, I'm gonna be in manual. The reason why I'm gonna be in manual is because usually right where the bride and groom stand is going to be brighter than everywhere else in that room. There's usually some sort of spotlight on them that just makes them brighter than everything else. Whether this is in a venue or in a church, there's always additional lighting right there where the altar is. So because of that, I'm gonna be in manual mode. I'm gonna have my ISO usually somewhere between 1600, as high as 6400, maybe even higher. I've shot at some churches before that are extremely dark, and most churches don't allow flashes. And personally, I don't even like using flash when they do allow it because I feel like it distracts from the ceremony. So I like trying shooting with just the lighting that they have available. Now, it may not be the most flattering, so sometimes I'll have the bride and groom go back to the altar after the wedding ceremony is over, and just take a picture with my lighting. But during the ceremony, I want to be as unobtrusive as possible. I don't want them to even know that I'm there, because I've heard some crazy horror stories from people about photographers doing some wild things at wedding ceremonies, and listen, that's not me. Don't be that guy. As far as my shutter speed, if I'm shooting with a wider angle lens, anywhere from 24 to maybe 70 or 100 millimeters, I'm gonna have a shutter speed around 1/125. I know that I can comfortably handhold that without getting any motion blur. And then if I'm shooting on my 70 to 200, I'm gonna have my shutter speed around 200. You know the old saying that they say, in order to make sure that your pictures won't have any motion blur in it from you shaking your hands while you're taking it, is to match your shutter speed to your lens's focal length. Or maybe they say double it. I don't know. You know what I do know is take a picture, look at it. If it's blurry, raise your shutter speed. Wow, wow, wow. Digital photography is awesome. Why would anybody want to shoot film? And then my aperture is usually around a 2.8. I'm so far away from the couple that I can get both people in focus at 2.8, and I don't need to worry about too much of what's going on in the rest of the room, because the main focus during the ceremony is going to be our bride and groom. Now, for an outdoor ceremony, we're doing something a little different here. I'm gonna be shooting in AV. Now, for some reason, whenever I shoot a ceremony outdoors, when the bride's walking down the aisle, beautiful, sunny, looks great. But when one of the other people are walking down the aisle, such as a bridesmaid, groomsman, a parent, the officiant, there always seems to be a cloud at that point. So the lighting's gonna be drastically different. And you know what? I don't wanna worry too much about my camera settings. I just wanna make sure I'm getting the shot that I need to get. So I trust my camera to pick a good shutter speed that'll work for my images. My ISO here is going to be around, you guessed it, 200. For the shutter speed, it's the camera's call. I'm shooting in AV mode. And then for my aperture, I'm usually still shooting around that 2.8 because I don't care too much about anything else other than the bride and the groom while I'm shooting the ceremony. Yeah, I'll go along the sides of the ceremony and sometimes shoot the parents or bridal party or family members and get the reaction. But even in that situation, I'm just trying to isolate a single person or two. And shooting at those wider apertures helps you do that a little bit more efficiently. Next up, we have the party. The reception. During the reception, I shoot in manual. The reason why I'm shooting with manual here is because I'm shooting with flashes. And I can't put my camera in an automatic setting with shooting with flashes. They're not that smart. They don't talk to each other. Well, at least mine don't, because I shoot with Canon cameras and Godox lights. I usually set my ISO to around 1600, but I will adjust it accordingly to whatever I need in order to help balance the room lights with what I'm trying to go for creatively and using my own flashes. My shutter speed is going to be 1/125, and for aperture, I'm usually shooting somewhere between f2 and f4. I still want to bring in the ambient light and the lights that the room has, such as uplighting or any candles that are in the room, to really capture the mood of the room, but I don't want to completely kill it either. I don't want to make the entire room dark except for where my flashes are pointing. And I don't want to solely rely on those lights to light my scene. So I want to find a good balance here between what my flashes are doing and still maintaining those beautiful room lights, because those room lights were part of the couple's vision for this wedding. So you got to honor it and make sure that you still have them in the pictures. As far as my lighting goes for a reception, we have the dance floor right in the middle of the room usually. And then I'll have one light diagonal from each other on opposite corners of the dance floor, pointing right into the middle. And those two lights are going to be my main lights. And then I'm gonna have a third light on my camera that I'm gonna use as like a fill. Yes, I could go with a lower ISO than 1600 and bump up the power of my own flashes, but the reason why I like shooting at 1600 is because it allows my flashes to recycle quickly, especially when there's a lot of action going on and things are moving quickly. We want to make sure that we're getting those shots and not waiting for our flashes to recycle. So shooting at a slightly higher ISO helps our flashes out a little bit, right? We got to give them some love too. And for my bonus tip, if you made it this far in the video, I really appreciate it. If you're not already subscribed, please do so, and I will love you a long time. Yeah, let's make it weird. Now this shot that I do for almost all of my couples is probably my favorite shot to shoot because it brings something truly creative to the wedding day. You're able to take a picture that the couple cannot see with their own eyes. You could put cool lights in the background, you could have fun with gels, you can do whatever you want here and have some fun. And this is one of those images that every one of my couples wants in their wedding album as the cover or the middle fold, or they want it printed and put really big on their walls. And this is also a great opportunity to sell a couple prints. I'm gonna put my camera into manual. The ISO is usually gonna be around 400. I'm shooting at a lower ISO here. At lower ISOs, your camera has a little bit better color rendition, and when I'm dealing with colored gels, I wanna make sure that those colors pop. So I'm gonna shoot at as low of an ISO as I can to still get the effect that I'm going for. My shutter speed is usually going to be around 100, maybe a little bit slower if I'm trying to pull in a little bit ambient light, or maybe the stars or the moon, or just whatever light is available around us. And then my aperture is usually going to be pretty wide, shooting somewhere between 1.4 and 2.8. The focus is on the couple, it's not in great detail, and we're usually shooting at a pretty wide focal range, so you don't need to worry too much about how sharp it is because it's not that type of picture. The important thing here is going to be your flash settings. Depending on the look that you're going for, how many gels you're using, grids, or other modifiers, that'll all vary what your flash power needs to be put at. I will give you one really good tip here. If you're going for super saturated colors, shoot your flash into something that's dark. Now you might think, okay, let me fire my flash into a white wall, and a white wall will light up with color. Well, what happens is that white wall absorbs all the color and just makes the flash kind of blown out and just look like a flash without a gel on it. So if you want to gel your image, make sure you're shooting your flash into something dark. And those are my camera settings for shooting a wedding. Hopefully this helped out somebody, maybe an aspiring wedding photographer, maybe somebody who is already a wedding photographer and just looking to switch their game up a little bit. If it did, drop a comment down below. Let's chat about your settings. Or maybe you're just one of those people rocking the P mode because you remember what P stands for. Professional mode. And until next time, peace.